Welcome to Higher Ground, a podcast that looks at the K12 leadership job market with a data-driven approach. Your co-hosts are Christina Greenberg, the CEO of Agility Search, who brings 2 decades of experience leading executive searches and meeting the talent needs of mission-driven organizations. And my name's Josh Zubrick. I founded Josh's K12 Jobs Blast and have been cataloging the K12 job market for the last 3 years. Now, stay tuned for today's pod. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Higher Ground. We're excited that you are here, and we are already at episode 8. I don't know if you can believe it, Christina.
It is insane. I mean, this came from an idea. I think this summer, you and I were like, we should think about this thing. And it's amazing. And I think I don't know about you, I'm having so much fun. So.
I'm having fun. I got over my technology phobia. I can code all day long, but I was like, you want me to learn how to use a microphone? Okay. So this is really exciting. And today, we were talking off camera, but we're really starting to turn the corner. So we really made a problem statement that people are leaving the profession. And if you've listened to the first 7 episodes, I think everybody is clear. People are leaving the profession. And so today we are going to turn the corner and start talking about things that we believe can work and are already demonstrating are working.
Exactly. And Josh, one thing you and I were thinking about and talking about, particularly related to the guest that we'll be getting to in a few minutes, is there are some really promising examples of school institutions, K-12 institutions that have been around a really long time that I think we could all learn from. And so why don't you tee up a little bit some of what you were thinking about in that regard?
Yeah, so we were thinking about last week, like, okay, how do we tell the story to listeners about what works? And for 15 of my years of my career, I worked in Ed Reform, I worked in traditional charter networks. There was so much good that could be learned and codified from strong charter networks. I think we all know that. And then I happenstanced upon being an assistant superintendent at a training and laboratory school. And I want to pause because when I first saw this job, I was like, I don't know what any of those words mean. But essentially the schools that are K-12 that sit on the campus of an institution of higher learning. There's one at UCLA, University of Memphis, LSU. I think Chicago Lab is probably the most well-known nationally. But these are these institutions where teacher candidates go to get their teacher training, but also professors are able to run their studies, doctoral students run their studies, and then really they contribute to the broader literature around K.
There's even one here in Oakland, Mills College. I know UCSD. So yeah, they're a pretty common method. And I think we've worked with UCLA Lab School, go Bruins. I'm a UCLA alum. I have to say that. But we've worked with the UCLA School now on 2 different head of school searches. They call them principals there. And I know for me, and you know this world much more deeply than I do, but for me as an outsider, it was really interesting because the interplay between what a university can offer, what a K-12 school can offer, and how they can support each other was really inspiring and innovative. And I'm curious, you were inside that school. So tell me a little bit about the experience and some of the things you were able to enjoy as a staff member.
Yeah, I think some of the takeaways, this was right. I started right after COVID. It was 2022. It was the second full school year back in brick and mortar. And the things that struck me, if you've lived in Memphis, the school is called Campus School, and it's pretty legendary. People across the state know it. So it was really bizarre to be working there. I was like, imposter syndrome. But the things I learned was we had over probably about 90 to 95% faculty retention every year. And let me be really clear that we use the term faculty because all of the people who were providing instruction at our early childhood center, elementary, middle, and high were university designated faculty. So they had the same faculty designation as the psychology professor or the business professor. And they sat within the university faculty and they had the same rights and privileges. That means that they participated in research. They helped shape research across all 14 colleges at the university. And so one misconception I had was I thought we would only be doing education research, but no, engineering had things, physics department came in, business, and it was just really, really cool to watch the opportunities. The second part that I thought was so fascinating was my own misconception where I did not think the school would be diverse when I interviewed and applied. And I actually wasn't going to apply. And they're like, why don't you come take a tour? And on the tour, I was like, wow, this place is so diverse. You should tell people that story. And they were like, we are literally trying to hire someone to do that. But we had students from all 36 zip codes in Memphis. And we had There's no academic requirement for entry, and we were number one in the state of Tennessee in both proficiency and 99th percentile in special ed, economically disadvantaged, Black, African American, proficiency, and growth. But I started to think through because the jobs loss was growing at the same time. So it was this weird convergence. But I kept watching teachers wanting to quit all around and apply, subscribing to the jobs loss. But then I saw our teachers not quitting, very satisfied. And if I had to say like 3 lessons, then I want to hear like how similar this is to UCLA. Number one, our faculty had free access to tuition for any program of study at any public university in the state of Tennessee. So if you wanted to get a PhD from UT Knoxville, if you wanted to get an MBA from Tennessee State, whatever you wanted to do, 100% free and covered. Number two, you were already a university faculty. Number three, your dependents got half off public tuition at any university in the state of Tennessee, right? So like just some real financial incentives that went beyond just salary, because I think sometimes we think salary alone is going to solve the problem. But really with training and laboratory schools, I did see, to what you alluded to, this interplay between faculty at the university and faculty at our K12 schools. And really the literature that they produced out into journals was just, I think, influential for thought leaders. And it was cool to watch the project happen and then read the article and be like, that happened. I watched that happen. Is that what you were seeing at UCLA?
It was. And they have an interesting model too, because they have a portion, I think it's about a third of their classrooms are dual language, Spanish. So, and as you probably know, with a real traditional dual language model, you need to have a certain percentage of monolingual or native Spanish speakers in the class for it to work, right? So that was also an interesting component. And at UCLA, there was a preference for university employees. And one of the things they tried to leverage with that was actually all employees. So not just professors' kids, but janitors' kids, right? And that was really fascinating because you're in LA, where there's a huge diversity of different folks. But this local school system, as you probably know, in LAUSD, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's probably 70 something percentile Latino at this point, right? And so it was actually a neat way to bring in kids, to your point, from outside Westwood, from other parts of the city whose parents maybe worked in UCLA or worked nearby, or, had an opportunity to get there. Transportation's always a thing in LA, but somehow the parents were able to get their kids there. So that was an interesting wrinkle. And they similarly did not have any academic requirements, but they had a really big wait list and a lottery. So there was a lottery for different kind of categories, like a lottery for the dual immersion program based on language of origin, and then a lottery for the school more generally. And there were a certain number of slots that were allotted to faculty. They were very in demand, but there were a certain number allotted to faculty and then a number allotted to just the general public. Like many other schools, it was not a purely public school in terms of being free to the public. There was tuition, but the tuition was less than a traditional private school, and it was scaled based on family income. So there were definitely families who paid nothing because they couldn't afford it. And it was in Bel Air. So you had literally celebrity kids, like movie stars, literally, whose kids went to this school. One of my colleagues did the town hall when we did the first search for them 7 or 8 years ago. I lived in LA for a long time, so I'm probably less starstruck. But I think for my colleague who was from the East Coast who hadn't done this, she's like, oh my God, so-and-so was at the parent night. And then you also had like regular LA folks, right, who just wanted a great opportunity for their kids. So that's a really interesting, literally like the entire gamut of income and wealth and privilege in LA at that school. But the other thing that I thought was so cool is the school, like you've alluded to, was run technically. I mean, there was a principal who runs it, but they are managed by someone at the education school. Right connection. And that dean of the education school manages the lab school as well as the education program. So very close, tight connection between the two. And I think for the teachers, what they loved is they were informing research. Like they really, to your point, were informing research, but they also were benefiting from researchers being in their classrooms, providing new ideas and innovative approaches. And they saw themselves, exactly to your point, they didn't see themselves as teachers. They saw themselves as faculty that were helping to inform research that was out there in the world. So I think it's a really cool model that I hadn't experienced much myself. I have friends that went to the Chicago lab school or other lab schools, but I myself hadn't experienced it. And I think it's a really neat model to learn from. And I guess when you think about retention, you've talked about obviously the opportunities for teachers to be able to inform research. that can't happen in all of our schools, but I wonder what are lessons that you think we could translate to our charter friends that they might learn from these lab environments that could help with retention or help their teachers and leaders feel more excited to stay?
Yeah, so I had a few lessons that are when we're like, man, every charter can't take place in research. I felt like a weird match.com sometimes because I had professors that were like, there are no schools interested in research. And then I have schools that are like, there are no professors interested in coming here. And I was like, or, I could just send you an email to both of you and you could go figure out how to do this thing.
Plus, Josh, that's like a subset of the job list. It's another matchmaking idea.
Because I was like, one argument I would make is like, I love that you're doing research at the lab school. And we were a free 100% public run institution. So nobody paid tuition. It was representative demographically. But I was like, but if you really, really want to get some research, like let's do attendance bound traditional public schools. Let's do charter schools. Let's get independent schools within the research and really understand how different environments and different settings can impact in our methodology. But I do think like a few lessons before we get to our guests that I would want charter leaders or nonprofit leaders to think through. Number one, how can you elevate the prestige of the faculty position within your school? You may not be able to do it financially, but how can you protect time, talent, and treasure to say how you are asking your faculty to spend time matters and they perceive it? We would have faculty that argued, and we were on a university campus. We had access to university students who wanted jobs. But our faculty said, you're asking us to do breakfast and lunch duty, but we're not asking the business school faculty to monitor the student union. And we were like, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And they're like, we're not babysitters, we're faculty. And so that may not be possible at every K-12 school, but you could think about it. And you could think about how you're spending time. You could think about how you're spending your budget. And there probably are opportunities to give time back to faculty, elevate the role of faculty, because you and I were both talking about it. The more stable your faculty and the more satisfied your faculty is, the less turnover you're going to have with system and school years.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Josh, do you want to introduce our guest today before we get to that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So our guest is Dr. Sally Parrish. She's my former supervisor, and she serves as a dual role vice provost and then also director of schools for the school district that's at the University of Memphis. So you mentioned UCLA reports into the dean. In essence, Sally is the dean of the K-12 system. So she reports to the provost, who reports to the president. She's been at the university over 20 years in terms of she was an undergrad, she was student body president. She did leave for a while, but then we all find our way home. And then for the last 9 years has really led our separate K-12 school systems and early childhood systems to converge into one system and one district. And then about a year ago became the Innovative School District, which is the state's first innovative school district, because to your point, they had a really long waiting list and now they can open additional schools. They opened an additional elementary school this year. So excited to hear from her, learn from her, and again, have other leaders just think differently from another perspective of how to elevate the profession.
I love that. Well, everyone enjoy the conversation and we'll see you next week on Higher Ground.
Thanks. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the second part of today's pod. We're continuing our conversation about leadership, and we're talking to CEOs and superintendents across the sector and across the country so that we can really think about how in a post-COVID reentry world, that role of a system and school leader has a bit evolved and shifted. So today I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Sally Gates Parish, who is the Vice Provost and Director of Schools at the University of Memphis. And you might say, well, what does that mean? Because they have their own pre-K through 12 school system that Dr. Parish leads. And so I'm really excited to have her today. She is also my former supervisor. So if I geek out at any point, that is what is happening for all the listeners. But, Sally, I'd love for you to take a moment just for people who don't know you to tell them who you are and how you got to the seat.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on, Josh. It's always good to see you. And I really appreciate the stories that you're sharing with educators and educational partners across the country. So as Josh said, I serve as a vice provost at the University of Memphis and also as our superintendent of university schools, which is the state of Tennessee's first innovative school district. We have about 1,200 students in our K-12 portfolio, about 1,500 when you wrap in our early childhood sites. Interestingly, the University of Memphis has had schools for 113 years as training and laboratory schools. Historically, those were very high-performing schools that serve children from all across our county, all of our diverse zip codes. And then in about 2018, a decision was made that we wanted to grow beyond the original laboratory and training school. And since then, we have opened 2 early childhood sites, a middle school, a high school, a second elementary school, and then now a school district. So it's been a really busy time for us, and we're really proud of the work that we're doing here.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to have you on for multiple facets, but one thing that has come up in a lot of the conversations has been how tired school and system leaders have been after the COVID reentry, because it was almost like adrenaline drove us into COVID, and then adrenaline drove us back into buildings. And then everybody took a moment and was like, wait a second, I'm really, really tired. And for listeners, university schools, I believe, if not the first, was one of the first districts back in the metro area. Correct?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. We were the first public schools back open in person in Shelby County.
And you've kept your leaders. And so I'm curious, for those listening, how'd you do it?
Gosh, that's a great question. I'll tell you, COVID, it really reframed the way that we thought about education. It brought parents and lawmakers into education in ways that they had never perhaps been given a front row seat to before. And at the time, everything was unprecedented, right? Like nobody knew what the heck we were doing. We were building the playbook every day. And so I'll tell you, it was the hardest time to be a leader in education. And our school leaders were really thought partners. And so in my role, I endeavored not to do anything to them, right? I didn't decree things to our school leaders. They were at the table for every decision. The decision to open or move to virtual, the decision to have COVID testing and later vaccinations on site, the decision to mask, and then when we were told to not mask, how to engage families in that process. And so I didn't enter this space thinking, oh, I know everything about this. Nobody knew anything about any of it. We were lysoling our groceries, for heaven's sake. But I did feel very strongly about making sure that those school leaders who were really the touch point to both the teachers, the students, and the families, that they were part of the decision-making processes. And Josh, we weren't necessarily choosing between the good thing and the bad thing. Oftentimes we were choosing between the bad thing and the bad thing, right? And when you're doing that, you have to have leaders to really work through those solutions together. And I think in many ways, that's how I was able to retain that team, is they felt like they were part of the process and part of the solution.
If let's say they waved a magic wand and said, you have to go find 5 additional principals tomorrow. Now, knowing what you know about education and where we've evolved, what are the things that you would look for in a school leader? Because I think a lot of times people are like, hard skill, can they coach, etc. And I know you think differently than that. So that's why I'm prompting here. What would you look for as you go look for a new school leader?
Yeah, if I had that magic wand, I would just make more of the ones I have. I bet they would wish for that too, because these can be hard and lonely jobs. You and I have had this conversation before. I think at one point, people saw leaders in education as being like the train conductor, right? Like you're the one up front, you're conducting the band, you're driving the train. And now it's really more like we're looking for the people that can lay the tracks, right? That can create the detours, that can rethink the map. Because the one thing constant in education right now is change. And that is not what we have always been known for. We have not always been known for rapid change in the public education sector. And yet, here we are, because we are on all the time. There is political engagement at levels we have never seen before. There's teacher turnover, there's school choice, there's so many things that are not just like one time a year, who moved my cheese moments. It's a daily ability to navigate change, to remain constant, to think innovatively and creatively, to question, does it have to be done this way, or is this just the way we're doing it? And are we doing this in service to students? Are we doing it with our community? Those are the kinds of leaders that we're looking for. And a lot of times those folks don't have a traditional pathway to the principalship. I didn't have a traditional pathway into this role. We're looking for folks that can really think strategically and in a solutions oriented way. Many of those folks are already those folks that I've had in my building, but we are also learning that that is a skill set that you can train and cultivate. And I'm hoping that more of us will invest in that training and cultivation for the leaders that are going to follow.
Yeah, I love that idea from going from like train conductor to zooming out and having to think through the whole gamut. One thing we're also hearing is a bunch of people say, again, we've hit on a bunch of leaders are tired, right? if we want people, and I know people don't stay in roles for 20, 30, 40 years anymore, but how do you encourage your leaders to sustain? How do you sustain yourself? What does it look like to make sure that your mask is on so you can stay constant?
Yeah, I mean, this is the hardest work I have ever done. Now, it's work worth doing, and it's joyful work, and it's impactful work, and I think that that's why people do it, right? I am reminded every day that I walk in our schools that our people are consciously making a choice to be here.
Mm.
Every year when we welcome our faculty and staff back to the school year, I thank them for choosing to work with us, because the days of someone signing a contract as a first year teacher and then sticking around for that state pension 30 years later, that's not necessarily the world of work that we are in right now. And so the way to retain that talent is to give people a space where they feel like they can make a difference, they feel like they can make a contribution, they're doing something that matters, that aligns with their personal values, but also that like they get to be off, right? Like part of your compensation plan in your job is your time off, right? And so next week is our fall break. I have pretty much made a mandatory decree that folks will not work on fall break. We're picking out pumpkins, we're going to a new bakery. I'm on my 90th book of the year. And so I want people to be whole people. Now, I also expect a high quality of work, right? And so we try to be very planful and collaborative in the work that we're doing so that you can be off when it's time to be off. And that's what I try to do. Now there are times of the year, we all know, where you are all in all the time. But when you can take a minute, take a step back, that's what we want our folks to do. That is an expectation just as much as it is to show
Mm.
up. So I get up and work out every morning, Josh. I don't love it, but I do it because I don't want to die in this chair, right? And so I get up and work out every morning. So I exercise my body. And then every night I put the phone down and I pick up a book, because what you can't
Mm.
send emails while you're reading a terribly written rom-com novel that you got from your public library. And so
Well
everyone
said.
needs to find that, right? And we should celebrate that.
Yeah, I think it's balanced. And I heard another leader talking about compartmentalization. And, again, I think when you're sitting in the superintendent seat, we're talking to a lot of, again, nonprofit CEOs, and it's all tough. And I think the superintendency at this moment may be the toughest job out there right now. What are, in just a last question, let's say, other advice you would give folks who are sitting in these tough seats for how to compartmentalize?
Yeah, so this is really interesting. I was at a Leading Now conference last week in Atlanta, and we talked specifically about the high turnover rate in the superintendency and how it's gone down. I mean, the number of years that people sit in this seat, it's a lot shorter than it used to be, and for lots of reasons, right? I had a role at a previous institution where a previous supervisor encouraged me to compartmentalize. And honestly, Josh, it was like a naughty word to me then. I was like,
Mm.
compartmentalize? Like, that it feels like you're telling me to be so inauthentic, right? Like you just want me to like shove this thing down here and not think about it. And I was like, I was a young whippersnapper and couldn't tell me nothing. And so I was like kind of offended by it. And I remember that person said, it's just a job. And I was like, how could it be just a job? It's like my whole identity, it's my whole everything. And then later I look back and I'm like, man, that chick was so unhealthy. Like that is not the way to be. And so now people tell me, oh my gosh, you compartmentalize so well. And instead of being offended, I'm like, yeah, that is a muscle that I have like developed over time in response, Josh, to the changing ecosystem in which we live and lead. Because if you do not, you will get eaten alive. And so I have to learn. Sometimes it feels very personal. I have two children in our schools, right? I have a fourth grader, I have a seventh grader. I've opened over half the schools that we have. Sometimes it feels deeply personal. And I have to learn, and I have to remind myself, and I have to compartmentalize like, hey, this isn't about you as a person. This is about whatever this thing is that you're trying to navigate, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you're not choosing, again, between the right thing and the wrong thing. You're trying to find the best thing.
Mhm.
So I make decisions with that in mind. I think about what is my personal best, right? It's not perfect, but how can I leave every day, put my head down on the pillow at night knowing that like I did the best that I could. And that's what I ask of my team. That's what I ask of my children. And that's what I expect of our students. And I think, for me, you have to surround yourself with good people. I cannot be good at everything. I am really good at some things, and then there are some things I am terrible at. And so I surround myself with people and empower them and try to get out of their way, right? And let them do their thing. And one thing that I am like very proud of myself in being good at is I try to remove boundaries. I try to get to yes. I try to cut through all the minutia and the red tape and figure out like what is the best path forward that's going to serve our students the best.
Yep.
And if you can kind of compartmentalize all of the other stuff, the noise, and really hone in on that, I have found that more often than not, it's not a perfect record, but more often than not, that gets you to the place you want to be.
I think that is a great place to leave it. And so for leaders, I think they were able to walk away with some good tips, including stop thinking of it as a train conductor, start thinking of it as the full engineer. So Dr. Parrish, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Josh.